Good evening, known world. I am Excellency Rahmut al-Tayyiba, coming to you from the Kingdom of Artemisia in the Barony of Bronzehelm, and I apologize if I sound a little congested. I have a cold and a sore throat, and it's all sorts of fun, but it's not COVID. With me today, I am honored to have Excellency Anne de Tournai. But before we start the show, and before she tells us why she's amazing and awesome, she has a tradition that first off, yes, the views and opinions of those expressed today as participants do not reflect any official policy or positions of SCA Inc. But Anne has something that, as a tradition, she would like to do to open our show.
Thank you very much, Rahmut. So it is a tradition in Australia, which is where I am based, and also in New Zealand, which are the two countries that make up the amazing Kingdom of Lochac, from which I'm talking to you. And I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all meeting today. I'm speaking to you from Ngunnawal Ngambri country. And I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are watching today, or any other First Nations people on whose lands we all walk. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. So, Your Excellency, why are you amazing? What is it that you do? Because I know what you do, but maybe our audience isn't so familiar.
Thank you very much. That's a lovely thing to say. I do a range of things currently in the society. Probably my proudest thing at the moment is that I am a landed baroness of the amazing barony of Politicopolis, which, for those of you not in Lochac, is in Australia, and it's sort of the lands around the Australian Capital Territory, our southern tablelands, and around places in sort of Yass and Murray Bateman. So we're about 3 hours from Sydney, for those people who tend to use Sydney as their sort of marker. I am also a pelican and a laurel. I am a laurel for the history of mustard and for historical cooking. And yes, we sometimes joke that laurels for food-related things are the delicious laurels of Lochac, because we are all about making Lochac more delicious.
I love that.
So, and in my other part of work in the society is I am a corporate officer. I look after communications.
Which, once again, she is not talking.
I'm here as Anne.
She's here as Anne.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, as we continue strolling down this road of retention, I think you and I talked about a couple things that we should definitely discuss. Let's go ahead and discuss first about identity and what identity's role in retention and recruitment means to you.
So there's multiple facets of identity, and I'm not talking about people's personal identity. I'm talking about, one of the things about retention is about becoming part of a collective identity. So when you think about collective identity, it's that thing that you go, actually, no, I'm part of a group, I'm welcomed, I'm homed, or, you know, yes, I this is a loyalty that I have. So one of the things that I think we often overlook when people first join our groups, and also then, people who've been with us long term, is what connections of identity do they have? How are they feeling in terms of their local group? Do they see themselves as, how do they identify? Do they identify as a member of the kingdom? Do they identify as a member of their local barony or shire or college? Or do they, is it a household identity? Because all of those factors are important. And one of the things, like take it, for example, when you're thinking about that landed role, is your job is to help create that identity. Mm-hmm. And your job is to make sure that people know. Well, like one of the conversations I will have with people who come up and introduce themselves to me at their first event, because I always try and meet people at their first couple of events, is to say to them, if you're ever unsure of where to sit or where to be because you just don't know, well, your place is with me because I am your baroness. I work for you in that situation. But it's really important because one of the things, particularly if you think about it, we have people quite often who come to us because we have a codified social structure and interaction. It means that can be an easier entry path into our club and our game for people who are neurodivergent. We've got codified social interactions. That makes it really clear. But it also means that if you're not explicit in making those welcomes really obvious and giving people really explicit instructions, they may not understand. They'll see the pomp, they'll see the ceremony, but they don't understand that the core of it is that you are there for them. So it's about making sure that people can have a place and know that that place is welcomed and valued.
Definitely. I love that, especially from that initial contact, like from your very first event, knowing that you are valued, knowing that you have a place, and knowing if you're unsure of where you can go.
And like you
know where you can go.
Yeah, and you put some little things like if I'm giving court or stuff, like, doing that sort of holding court or that sort of thing, you'll say, not a problem, just have a seat and then come find me afterwards. But never, part of our thing is if you think about it, that's what fealty is about. It's about, and I am there for you and your households. And that's what we say, the crown says to us and we say to the crown. It's those kind of structures. So actually giving it sort of a personal touch and a lived experience for people makes it stronger.
Definitely.
Hi, Falada. Falada has just logged in from Glenarvan. So,
greetings, Your Excellency. That's cool. I love it when it's people my guests know, like logging on and saying hello, because it's that community connection too. That's part of your identity. That's one of your friends, one of your peers.
And I think this is the whole thing. I think we know, like, if people stay with our game longer term, it's because we have passions for it. It's connected with this in some way, and we care so very, very much. So it's about finding the elements of it that really, finding the ways that are healthy to express it, both for you as an individual and also for the people who are receiving it.
Baron Cal, His Excellency, just posed a good question. How do you balance that you are valued without overwhelming the person? I'm sure is what he meant.
Yeah. So I would say step one, you don't necessarily hit them with full box and dice of you are valued. I would say the first thing that I'd actually say is, hi, welcome. We're really you express your joy that they are here. You ask about them because it's all about creating connection. It's that sort of thing. So, that's fascinating. How did you find out about us? What are you interested in? Those sort of things. So it's that sort of thing. You see someone and acknowledge them as a person. And like that gives you a really good foundation.
So you don't act like you're their best friend instantly. You just act like they're a friend.
Well, connection is built through authenticity. Connection is built through authenticity and vulnerability. So it's that sort of thing. If I appear to be inauthentic in how I express my joy and appreciation, Australia, basically most people are really good at sort of cocking an eyebrow and going, really? So.
that really fine-tuned detector goes off.
Well, think about how we react to like salespeople or public or politicians. In that, hey, nice to meet you. How are you? Oh, I'm so and you're going, yeah,
car salesman.
And, yeah, well, and that's the whole thing.
Although
is like
I do know car salesmen and politicians and salespeople that really are they come across very genuine versus being disingenuine.
And that's the whole thing. It's people who are genuinely interested and can demonstrate that. We also, as one of the things, like currently at the moment in my courts, I ask people to come and find me afterwards because sometimes you need an excuse. And being called up in your first court can be very overwhelming if you don't know how to interact or you don't know something like that. So I say, come and find me afterwards. And I normally have a small token. It'll either be because I'm a cook, spices, a small bag of spices from my own personal spice supplies, or we have some amazing lamp workers and bead makers in. So they may get a little bead or something in the personal colors of in the colors of the barony. But I think that joy and appreciation is a consistent thing in terms of retention.
Well, and I don't know if you find it this way, like when you are meeting somebody for the first time, it's easy to be genuine when you're genuinely passionate about the SCA, sharing that joy with other people. Like, hi, I'm glad you're here. Let me show you all the cool things.
Sometimes it's a case of filtering it a little bit because we are so incredibly passionate, and it's like you can just see people go, "Ooh, information overload," sort of, So yes. it's sometimes it's that whole sort of moment of just finding that slow, just don't waterfall it. Maybe just have a small stream of it's that. But I also think that's really important for our long-term people to know that they're seen and valued. And it could be not necessarily like, some of our people have large numbers of awards or anything, but still finding ways to acknowledge and connect with people and actually go, well, I've seen you. Like if you know someone teaches classes all the time, the conversation isn't, hey, will you teach a class? It's, look, these things I'm hearing about, is there anything you'd be particularly interested in teaching? Or, wait a second, I've noticed you've been doing some really fascinating work around blah. Would you be interested in sharing that with people? So it's not just, because if you think about it, like for those of our long-term teachers, they, particularly if they're teaching introductory classes, they may teach those hundreds of times. And that can actually be a bit draining for them. So finding different ways that a teacher feels refreshed and engaged at the same time and seen for the work they're doing, not just for what is the sort of introductory piece, is really important.
Yeah. Just because somebody's taught, maybe Heraldry 101, maybe that's really not what they want to teach. They've just taught it for, multiple decades. What they really want to get into is like very specific niche, 11th century Danish heraldry.
And it's like we've been looking at different ways that we can look at sort of streaming class levels at multiple, like and streaming as in creating streams of classes as opposed to electronic streaming. Although both work. But it's about that thing about going, well, okay, for your people who want those slightly more in-depth discussions, where's that place for them? How do we find that as well so that they're also, because there's, as you find there's a joy and a recharging that happens when you can pull, like deep dive into a topic that you're all interested in, and people are sharing ideas and resources and everything like that. So you come out of that. And that, I think, helps our longer term people as well.
So along those same lines, so there's kind of like different ways that teachers teach. And sometimes what's best is to have, instead of just like a blanket class, to have kind of like a roundtable discussion. So it's more interactive. How do you feel that could potentially help engage that sense of community within?
Number one, you're creating a safe space to ask questions. And that's the whole thing is like if you think about it, our club is 56 years old, and throughout those 56 years, we have grown, evolved, changed, etc., and gotten better. And so creating safe spaces for us to do that is really key. Being able to find the opportunities and sometimes to have the discussion you didn't know the group needed to have. Like that panel, like one of our smaller groups, for example, had a bit of a rush of some newer members. And so you had some really long-term people, and then you had people who were quite new. And so one of the things they were doing was doing roundtables on various topics that were related to the SCA. That were, some of them were study. Some of them were very much about how do we create the culture that we want to actually play our game in.
Master Aslak chimed in saying that creating that safe space creates that community.
Absolutely. And also, a big shout out to Master Aslak, who still, I don't know how he did his quick change during his ceremony. That was amazing. I don't need to know, it'd spoil the magic, but
I was okay, sidebar just for a second. I'm a huge magic fan, and Master Aslak knows. I was lucky enough to be at his elevation and get to see it in person. And yes, Cal is right. He is an actual wizard. It was incredible to see in person. I'm sure streaming was just as incredible, but all the feels. Okay, I'll stop fangirling for a second. Sorry, Aslak. We also talked about, when we talk about retention in the SCA, about the locational differences within the SCA.
Well, it's a really interesting thing. Lochac, for those of you who don't really know vast amounts about Lochac, Lochac is huge. Lochac is 2 separate countries, and we're absolutely enormous. Like Australia is the same size, for example, as the US in terms of, there are just significantly less of us, and we're mostly around the coasts, because the middle of us is very, very hot, and there isn't a lot of water. Unless suddenly there's too much water, which is the other joy of our continent.
Extremes.
But yeah, so it's about what is the types of events that you can run. How do you make sure that those events are events that people can get to? And that will all be sort of, it's about that sort of factor. So, for example, is your location for the event that, is it accessible? What are the things? So, for example, if we have a really large event where we're expecting people from other groups to travel, well, have we looked at accommodation? Have we looked at, the different factors around it? Have we looked at access to services? So a difference from events in Lochac to events that I've seen happening in other parts of the known world is it is incredibly rare in Lochac to run an event at a hotel or a sort of sports centre type thing. So most of our things, we tend to be at camping grounds, scout halls, local halls, etc. So there's just different infrastructure. If you're doing that, what is the types of access, that you need to consider? Have you thought about, now, thankfully, most places in Lochac are accessible in terms of making sure that people with a disability have access to the hall, but you need to think about that when you're actually planning and locating your events. Have you made sure that this event can be able to be accessed by people from the widest groups possible who might have an interest? Not every event is going to suit everybody, and that's okay as well. You just need to have an appropriate range. Oh, you poor thing.
It's all right. Just cough came on.
Soldiering on.
Oh, I will soldier on, darn it. I have no risk of infecting anybody with anything other than my personality and voice here, but I had to step out and not go to an event yesterday because even though it's not COVID, it's a cold and it sucks, and I don't want to share.
But I think that's one of the things as well. That's one of the messages that we're really starting to see coming through. Because if you think about that, that care for our community, that care and that demonstrated care and the actual making that explicit is one of the things that helps people feel comfortable at events. It's that people know that that people's health needs are going to be seen and acknowledged.
Definitely. Especially when you were talking about access and accommodations, like that is a very big concern. Like, is that site someplace where it has concrete floors and it's, difficult on people's feet? Is it a site that's not heated or not a air conditioned site? Is it a place that has dual purpose where somebody's going to have an allergy issue being inside that building?
And also, is it in a location that is like easy? Do people just in general feel safe accessing that particular site? Is it, if it's in a neighborhood that there might be a lots of potential issues, is that the best place to put your event? Now, sometimes it might be for various circumstances, but it's all of those different things to think about in terms of that. And it's like, for example, I ran a large event for my barony just in the end of November. It's a brand new site because this is our biggest event for the barony. And one of the things we asked for was give us feedback on the accessibility. It is more accessible than our previous sites, but what can we want to be here for several years. So what are we to do, So things like at night, finding out that like going, okay, it'd be good to put some extra lights along the main road that ran through it so that people who aren't in wheelchairs, for example, would know where the safe points are for them to access the field parts of it, as opposed to because there was a bit of a ditch that would ran. So making sure that we could make sure that people were safe. The showers and toilet facilities were great, but we now know that it would be really good if we could put some mats or maybe some ply with rubber matting, because there was like sort of a series of rocks out the front of them that could be quite difficult for people. So it's like, okay, great, we'll just improve that for next time. Nice. And the site as well was really good. They also asked us for feedback because they hadn't had a lot of, like, for example, wheelchair users in their accessible cabins. So they wanted to know what were the good things and what could they, improve on.
Well, and that's something that we all can do. We can all always do better. So yep. Soliciting for that feedback, or asking for surveys from people who attend events so that you can improve for next time, or make changes on a bigger scale if need be for safety and accessibility.
But it's also the thing is, and this is something that we can do as participants as well, is the first question that we can ask when we go to give feedback to a stewarding team, particularly at the end of the event, is, hey, I have some ideas. Is this the right time to talk to you about them?
Definitely.
Because the thing is, we don't want great ideas lost because people aren't in the headspace, to hear them.
Just like as you're breaking down the event, people come up and be like, hey, I have an idea for next year. You should do something else. I'm tired. I run an event and now I'm breaking down site and putting things away and cleaning up, and email me.
But email you, and also just recognize that your event team will be aware of anything that went wrong, like of the things that they know of that went wrong. Our brains tend to focus on those more than the things that went right. So maybe just give them a couple of days, just
a decompression time.
Yeah, and that's the way we can look at it. But it's also changing how we view things. It's we learn or we succeed, as opposed from I pass or I fail. It's how do we move to that sort of growth mindset to actually ensure that. And because being open to constructive feedback and to being that, and also being comfortable, being a little bit uncomfortable, because sometimes the thing that you've worked really passionately at did not work for somebody. And your intent might be brilliant, but it may not have been the impact that you wanted to have. So being open to being slightly uncomfortable in the feedback you receive and being gracious and respectful in how you do that
definitely
is a way for us to help us retain those people who care enough to tell us. And that's the whole thing, is people who come to events and then point out ways that things can improve, they care. And even when sometimes, I'm hearing things that may not necessarily have wanted to hear, I have to keep that frame of reference. And if I keep that frame of reference, it helps me go, okay, all right.
Definitely. Countess Falada pointed out sometimes it's also not what you say, but how you say it too.
Absolutely. Yeah, very much so.
And that goes with like everything, not just, giving feedback. It's how you interact with other people. It's your body language. It's a whole combination of 1,000 million nuances that kind of.
Well, we communicate as whole people.
Yeah.
In that sort of thing. And it's particularly important when we're writing emails or we're communicating online because we lose that other 90%. It's why we had to invent the emoji. So, it's
like... But at the same time, if it's just emoji, it's harder to be as serious about it sometimes.
Well, it's a really interesting... Sorry, I may go into a brief nerdery moment here. Moving to the point where language is fluid and language evolves. So language is not a fixed state. It can absolutely be, but if someone's going multiple emojis, it's like, okay, can I find an intent from that? Or have I just, I have to check myself first am I just writing it off because it's a bunch of emojis, and and I'm a word nerd. I love language. I love all the varieties of it and how it can be used and all that sort of different elements. But sometimes I need to check going, okay, have I made this, am I communicating in a way that is accessible to the widest possible audiences?
I always fall back on that when I'm sending emojis to my son, because he's a different generation than me. I always have to, I keep using this emoji and I get that reference from Princess Bride. You keep saying that word. I don't think it means what you think it means, that kind of thing. I'm like, oh gosh.
But that's also the thing is, it's about us actually, and that brings up another point in retention is, how are we listening to generational change? How are we acknowledging and respecting the long term? Look, this is October this year will be my 31st year in the society. So, it's I've been playing for a long part. But how do I make sure that I am listening to the newer people coming into our game? Mm-hmm. And how am I making sure that I'm not just falling into old patterns? And that's the thing is, I think Duchess Helga has a great line about honor people, respect tradition.
Definitely.
And that's the whole thing is, we need to start with people. Have you got that actual absolute? And the absolute basis of honor is respect.
Yep.
So, we need to make sure, how are we listening to new people? How are we finding ways to connect with them? Because often they will, and I think Helga says something very similar, they will be part of the source of joy to help you reconnect and retain your own love.
Oh, definitely. Seeing the look of joy on someone who's only been playing for, a year, 5 years, 10 years compared to, my own joy. And I'm like you, I'm coming up on 30 years of the SCA. It rekindles the magic for me. Seeing the look on someone's face at their very first feast, yep. When that magic moment hits, that's what this is.
But also being, as long-termers, being open to finding those magic moments for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not it's the, early morning privy walk at a camping event when all you can look out and see is tents and there's fog rising up and everything, and you go, oh, that's right, this is why I do it. Or you watch, I have been privileged to witness so many immense acts of generosity and kindness from the SCA community. I think that's one of the things that is absolutely amazing. I know if I'm stuck anywhere in sort of the US, for example, I could put a call out to an SCA group and say, hey, help. And there would be people who would help. Our community is amazing. We can always be better, but gosh, there's some fabulous things about that. And this is that other thing is that we, as part of our retention, need to be aware of. Think about the stories we are telling and thinking about if we are passing on lessons or passing on trauma. So, and I think that's one of those things as, as a Laurel, You hear the horror stories of the mistress seam checker and the or master so and so who does blah blah blah. Okay, think about that. Think about, has that actually happened to you? What were they talking about? Was it a way to think? I think at any level, feedback without request, is discourteous. So, like, if you're going to go up and talk to somebody about their project, talk to them about the things that you thought were really interesting and fabulous about them.
Well, there is that how to give feedback. Feedback is better kind of served in that kind of sandwich, the positive, something that definitely is a highlight, something that is an area maybe that you hadn't considered on how to improve it. And then, gosh, overall, like, this is what was the wow of the whole thing that you did, and I want to see more. Like, you make that kind of sandwich. So
but also asking for people, what do they mean by feedback? What are they looking for?
Correct.
Because are they looking for me to look at that from a technical perspective and go, right, okay, this isn't, okay, you've done some really interesting thinking here. This is where that worked. Wait a second. Okay, you seem to have made a couple of assumptions. Can you talk to me about those assumptions? As opposed to, hey, that's brilliant. Oh, so it's your first attempt? That's really great. What did you like? What did you learn? So finding those questions and finding a way to actually identify, because we in our own passions and at times in a level of we cannot always be the greatest in terms of our social interactions, So it's finding those elements about actually, what is the person looking for from me? How can I give it to them? And what is a way that works effectively for me? And at the heart of everything, be kind.
Definitely. The be kind is kind of, should be like the new number one rule for everything, just anything involving humans and animals and plants too sometimes. Just be kind.
The older I get, the sexier kind people become. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's just like
I think maybe kindness is the new, black t-shirt kind of thing, like you just
my days of
on everything.
dating musicians and roadies are a little behind me, so it's but kindness and competence are amazingly attractive in a human. It's one of those fabulous things, but also just not in the sort of flirty attractive, but in making our group welcoming. I know Lady Marjorie was talking, and I were talking recently, and she said, we don't want to recruit new members, we want to make new friends. And that, I think, is a really smart thing for people to think about in terms of when they're thinking about recruiting and retaining people.
Definitely.
How do you actually, how do you make these people feel part of the community?
That needs to be like a SCA sticker logo. We don't want to recruit new members. We want to make new friends.
Yeah. So it's that sort of thing.
I love that. And especially when you were talking about the, acknowledging the truths, and being very cognizant and careful to not perpetuate those kind of the trauma, the falsehoods, the myths.
Oh, but not only that, is there may have been a situation that was not good. How did we learn? How did we grow? People who, if we're still telling stories from 10 years ago, despite the fact that we may have put in new systems, changed things, our group dynamics may have changed, we may have new people in different positions, what is the benefit we are trying to achieve from that? How are we introducing our community to our newer people? Because if people, the other thing is, as we both acknowledged here with our relative youth in the society, how do we give people the space to learn and grow if they authentically acknowledge that something didn't, because people change. People change, and we need to give people the opportunity to change as long as they are demonstrating behaviors that show that they are actually learning and growing. So telling stories about someone's bad behavior from 15 years ago when we've not seen any, elements of that, how does that help a new person? How does that make other people think,
Well, it's kind of that when you see somebody exhibit, the bad behavior, for example, of talking badly about someone, and then you assume they always will forever talk badly about someone. Well, geez, they were, let's say, 16 at the time when they first started playing, and they're second gen. Now they're 32. There's a lot of growth that happens as a human in any amount of time, but that long childhood behavior gets, hopefully left behind. And if you can see they no longer do that kind of behavior, why would you assume that they still are that type of person?
Yeah. And therefore, so how do we stop telling those stories? Because that's about being fair and about being, about making sure that we are acknowledging the truth of our communities while allowing people to grow, learn, and change.
So what would be, I know for me, the best strategy when I see people telling those kind of stories that happened in the past would be to advocate and step in and say, look, that did potentially happen in the past. I wasn't there. I can't speak for myself, but you were. So that's why you're telling the story. But this person's not like that now.
So some of it is actually about acknowledging that. That's really important. Some of it is about asking questions. It's like, like in a context is like, if someone tells like a racist or a misogynistic joke, for example, questioning them about going, oh, I don't understand. Why is that funny? Can you explain it to me?
That's a good strategy.
Oh, that's interesting. So what makes that funny? Oh, okay, right. That's really interesting. As we change and we grow in different levels of the society, we also have a greater social responsibility to actually be advocating for our community and making sure that we're living up to the ideals that we want to live up to. So sometimes, and it's about picking a moment. Some people, it may be more appropriate that you have a quiet chat. Some people, it may be more appropriate because, number one, if you think about it, you need to think about people's personal safety and accountability.
Yeah, and there definitely are moments where conversations, if you can politely interrupt a conversation and kind of take the person who is opening their mouth and inserting their foot aside and privately kind of be like, hey, that joke you're about to tell, sorry I had to interrupt you, but that's not okay to tell that joke. That's it.
Or just, it's, I look, I think everybody is doing their best, My best may not be the good that you need, but if I work from the basis that everybody is doing their best, I think that's really important. It's we need to make sure that we're able to acknowledge that, and sometimes it's a self-check, as well as like, what is the story I'm telling myself, and if I can start seeing people through that kind of filter, it means how I interact with them will change. Mm-hmm. How I interact with myself will change as well. And that might mean, particularly in terms of retaining people, we're actually creating spaces for people. Going back to that element again about we're going, okay, wait a second. Many years ago, I ran the catering kitchen that was running at Rowaney Festival, which is Lochac's largest event. You should all come. It's normally held around Easter in the Barony of Rowaney, just near Sydney. So I may do another plug for that later in the thing. But
go for it.
I ran the catering kitchen, and I had a volunteer who was amazing. They were hardworking. They were on time. Everything. They could not cook to save their life. They burnt porridge. They overcooked eggs. They were which are sort of my two sort of introductory kind of level. Could you stir this porridge and could you just scramble these eggs? That's okay. I could have kept asking them to do the thing that they weren't good at, and we both would have walked away from those interactions feeling really unsatisfied. It's that sort of thing. Or I could go, wait a second, no, that's like they're here, they've offered to work, they've offered to assist, they've shown up, they've been on time. Wait a second, what is the role that I can best use their talents in to make them feel like they're having a good time while volunteering? And I can. So it's about actually pausing and taking that moment to actually go, how do I make sure that I am seeing the person for who they are and seeing where I can take a strengths-based approach rather than an approach of, they've just burnt porridge again.
Well, and as a peer, because you are both a pelican and a laurel, like that is a skill, assessing, strengths of other members and helping them. I mean, there used to be that mindset where you play or you have to fix or improve and get rid of all your weaknesses, your deficits. And then there's this company that came out with Strength Finder, and they kind of thought, hey, let's analyze what your strengths are and use those strengths and build on it. And as a peer, helping to lift other members up, that's the best, by finding their strengths and helping them play to them.
Yeah, it's really finding those sort of spaces. And it's about that. So, and it's the thing is, like, and I want to put a bit of a thing is, all of us do this in our interactions with people all of the time. Human beings are pattern-based learners. That's how we learn. So we create patterns and then we tell ourselves stories because that's how we make sense of the patterns. So all of us as people who are involved in the SCA have an opportunity to actually think about what are the stories we're telling ourselves, what are the patterns we're seeing, and how do we actually make those opportunities. So I would do a big call out of, don't wait for someone. If you see someone who has a skill set or a thing like that, and that, ask them, number one, is that something that they'd like to use in the SCA? How do you use it as a way to connect them and get them involved?
I like that.
It's about actually finding those elements where you can see someone's strengths, how it can be applied, but also what brings them joy. Because, like, I can be very good at some things that I really hate doing, and if they're the only things that I get asked to do over and over again, I'm not going to want to come and do them.
It makes sense. Like, everybody has the thing that, hey, I'm good at it, I can do it, I sometimes like to do it, but I don't always want to be the one to do it. Yeah. Somebody else might like to do it besides me for a change.
Yep. And that's the whole thing. So it's making sure you're checking in with the people the people who are around you in your group to go, hey, that person who's done that thing for all of those years, are they still happy to do it? Sometimes people can feel trapped, and that can be one of the ways that people can burn themselves out.
So, kind of along that burnout, we, before the show, had talked about previously about how people kind of have seasons. People have a seasonality about them. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I know that for me, that's a burnout.
I would like us to build the self-awareness in ourselves as an organization, but also as individuals, that we're able to recognize when we need to be more seasonal in our approach. Like, we might have our spring summers where we're really full on and we're doing lots of stuff and everything like that, and we're really passionate and we're really engaged and this is amazing. But we might also need times to sort of rest and recharge. We might have times. I was a principality and then a kingdom exchequer for 6.5 years in total. Don't do that.
Thank you.
That's really, really silly.
But thank you.
Yeah, but it's an interesting thing. Like, I look back at that time and go, I was good for 4. In my opinion, I was crap for 2.5. And that was a really difficult thing for me, and it meant that I had some time away from the SCA because I like being good at things, and therefore I struggled with the fact that something I had wanted to do a really good job at, because we as humans only see the most recent thing, and we see that, and it was like, okay, right, yeah, all right, no. And because I could only see what I felt as a failure, it meant that I stepped away. Whereas if I had been able to recognize earlier that it was an opportunity to go, oh, wait a second, no, there's someone else who can do this job. It doesn't have to be me. It's looking at those sort of things. So, like, when I swore fealty as a pelican, one of the things that I put in my fealty was no harm to self, others, or the endeavour. The SCA
Ooh.
should not be a game of martyrs. This is not a healthy mindset, and it's how we stop retaining people. And the whole thing is you need to look after yourself, because self-care is incredibly important and it enables us to give back to our friends and our community. And then, you think about the actions that you're taking in terms of like being able to support. So you, number one, no harm to yourself. You don't want to do any harm to others or to the endeavor. So how is it, like, will the actions I take harm the thing I am trying to achieve? Now, we're going to make mistakes. Sometimes we won't realize it. But I think this whole myth of the, oh, I broke myself. Oh, I think one of the things I really like, I've gotten really passionate about over the last number of years is, oh, I broke myself doing blah, blah, blah to deliver that. Okay, number one, that's not healthy. Let's set up some better boundaries and let's set up some better supports. Because when we break ourselves, or even if we get into the habit, what are we modeling for other people? Number one, we've damaged ourselves, and that's not a healthy thing.
No.
But we've also told people that that's the expectation and that's the base level, and that's not okay, because when we all work together, we can deliver amazing, amazing events and things. But it's also about doing it in a way that's healthy, and that's how you get stronger groups.
Definitely. Like, we don't want to be like the fighter who, had to win this tournament. They broke themselves by, tearing out their shoulder. The rotator cuff got tore because they were, had to be the best. And we don't want to be the person at, running back and forth, doing gopher from gate for the, the exchequer to the autocrat and, trip and fell delivering messages. We don't want that. We don't want the artisan who stayed up way too late cranking out whatever it was they needed to crank out for whatever prize, award, etc.
Like, and there will always be times we're a bit passionate and we want to just push through at everything. Yes. And that's okay as exceptions.
But not all the time.
But that shouldn't be how we do our game in general. It should be, an exception rather than the rule. Because the thing is as well, if you think about you would hope that the fighter who starts to pop their shoulder has a thought that, wait a second, the technique I'm using needs to change. The person who, one of the questions that I've started by asking myself as a bit of a check, as just is, am I going to make myself a problem for somebody else to solve?
That's really good too.
It's that sort of thing of, I could do this. What is the cost, and will I make myself a problem for somebody else? So for me, one of the things has been starting to acknowledge that by the end of an event, I could be incredibly tired. And so I need to look at the things that where I can help with pack down and everything. And that could just be coordinating and pointing people to what the next job is or things like that. In my heart, I'm going, I'd like to be doing all of the things and helping at everything. I physically might not be able to at that point. Is there a person who, let's say, at the start of an event would like to help, but they may not be as mobile or everything? Wait a second, are they someone who might be a really great person to sit down and have a chat, with a hire gear, for example, if stuff's being hired or you've got particular equipment that needs to be picked up and everything. So it's going back to that strength-based approach about thinking about those different elements.
Definitely. And with that, like, finding the opportunities that acknowledge there might be an accessibility or mobility issue, and yet not discounting that person's service. No, they're still a valuable resource because they might have experience, they have the knowledge.
But it also shows the fluidity of our game and how our game is a game for everybody. Because if you think about it, like learning, you've got parents who have young children, they show other people who might have young children that they can still join our club and play our game. And they may have tips and techniques for what works and what doesn't work. It might be the people who go, okay, You know, like it's finding those different elements to actually make sure, like one of the challenges that we've had historically with marketing the SCA is that we're huge and we're incredibly, there's a huge number of activities you can do. And unlike a professional performance troupe, which is one small thing in one small region, everything, you know, we are multitudes, we are legion. You know.
But not in the weird kind of cultic way.
No, absolutely not. No. But it is really, but that's the whole thing, is going, find your space. Find your space, find the thing that works for you, and acknowledge that that thing changes. Like when I first joined the SCA, it was, for me, it was about music and pretty dresses, you know? And I still like music and pretty dresses, but I like feeding, I like feeding people a lot more. And
that's a good thing too.
You know, there'll be magic moments in different elements. So finding those different ways to connect to them and acknowledging is a really cool thing.
Well, and one of the things that we had talked about too was, like, you had made a statement that the SCA is a living organization that's always evolving. Really, with the structure from a family with kids and a bazillion different things and different magical moments, how do you foresee the SCA to continue to evolve?
Look, I think we are going to continue to learn. We're going to think, like, I think the fact that we are now pre-17th century world history, oh my God, so exciting. Yeah. I noticed Duchess Constantia has just said, came for the music and the pretty dresses and stayed for the mustard. As someone who was intimately involved in my early times in music, I'm going to give Duchess Constantia out for her musical prowess. And yes. I promise I will talk mustard with people whenever they ask. Sometimes even when they don't ask, but I'm getting better at that.
You might get a private message down the road from me about mustard, because my son and I are both passionate mustard lovers.
Well, look, major condiment of the pre-17th century era, you know. A simple thing to make your stuff more period, add some mustard to it. So yeah. But it's around those elements to think about the different ways we connect and we grow it. It's about, and I think I touched on this a little, for those of us who've been playing a long time, being open to learning and evolving. It's for those of us being, you know, and I, like, one of my best explanations I've ever heard of privilege, because privilege is one of those words you hear tossed around a lot. It simply means that you don't have to think about something someone else needs to think about, you know. And there's like elements, and like when we've been in the SCA for a long time, we get an element of SCA privilege. There's things that just we don't have to. So being a little comfortable being uncomfortable when people talk to us, because that's a practice, you know, and thinking about the ways that things can change, and that change isn't frightening, but change can make things better. Yeah. Like there's there's an author, David Weber, who has a major character, Honor Harrington, and it's like their sci-fi books. They're a romp of a read if anyone's into them. But I think she's something like in the 25th or 31st sort of century or stuff like that. And she has an uncle who's playing SCA. And he's playing SCA, you know, with modern handguns and stuff like that, you know, because that's so, you know, old, agey and vintage and stuff like that. You know, I like the framework that we have around our game now. I love pre-17th century. I think that gives us, and with that opening up to world history, I think we've got a whole lot of time to really learn and grow and build all of the amazing things from that. But I just think that's the whole thing is, if you think about it, we're a community of passionate people. So we will always have strong opinions about what we like and what we don't like. Being open to listen respectfully to each other and to go, wait a second, this works for all of us, I think is a huge opportunity. So I'm pretty confident the SCA is going to be here for a long time.
Perfect. I agree. We also talked a little bit about equity, sustainability, and growth.
And I think that's the whole thing, is to think about when you're looking at new ideas or when you're thinking about that. And that's the whole thing, is about if you're trying new things, how do you sustain them? You know, sometimes things can be amazing, but they can have a time frame. Acknowledge, like some of, I don't know, some of my favorite TV shows are perfect in the time capsule that they were in at that point.
But then you watch them 20, 30, 40 years later and go, what?
Or just, it's that sort of different elements of that. So it's acknowledging that. It's acknowledging that an event may be absolutely brilliant, but if you didn't actually, the event might be actually brilliant, but if you try to run that event every single year, your community is not going to cope. So okay. So, for example, I was involved in the last time Lochac ran a great food, Politicopolis has had a signature food event run twice in Lochac, which is called the Good Food Feast. And the idea about that was very much, I think the equivalent of it is some of the Perfectly Period style events that we've seen. But the whole idea about it was to really elevate and to... sorry, I'm just going to mute for a second because I'm just getting a repeat call. Won't be a second.
Okay. She's actually multitasking. If she's gracious enough to be on. I don't know if anybody else is aware, but she has a very large time difference being in Lochac as opposed to my Kingdom Artemisia. So she's just gracious enough to be able to do both. Oh, you're muted.
I am muted. I don't think maybe that means I owe you a cuppa.
Well, it looks like Rowaney Festival is where I have to go to, right?
Yes, absolutely. I'm afraid I will shortly, just on the basis, because for those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, this is actually my lunchtime on my Monday. So,
well, since we know we're getting to the end of the show anyways, I know you have a plug that you definitely need to do.
Yes, I definitely want to suggest that people check out. Yes, Cal, I will make sure you get some Tim Tams. Yeah, I want to suggest that people check out the huge range of classes and things like that that's on the Society's YouTube channel. I also want to suggest that people have a look at some of the amazing different things that are happening in your local arts and sciences displays. You don't know what you like. There are some projects that people are coming up with, which is just amazing. And if you're ever in Politicopolis, towards the end of the year, I'm going to invite you all to Fields of Gold, which is an amazing, 2.5-day event, which is camping, but also dorm accommodation and feasting, fighting, equestrian, amazing classes. So you should definitely all come to that.
And there's one other plug that I was waiting to hear about that we had talked about. Something where we can spend some money and get some swag.
Yeah, thank you. For those of you who haven't seen it, the Society for the very first time ever has done merch. So we'll pop the link in the chat. But you have an opportunity up until 30 January to be part of the first ever shirt that's the SCA has done. Like we've put the SCA logo and things like that on other type, but this is the first time we've ever done like apparel. So, the shirt is great. Wow. And the thing is as well, if you're interested, you can definitely send us ideas for other sorts of merch that you'd love to see. Because we're keen. Swapping briefly into my corporate role for a second, as we sort of get the new system sort of happening up and running in terms of our new membership system and the marketplace, there's a lot more opportunity for us to be able to share. And that's the whole thing is we are more than a hobby. We really are. We're a community. And we're about 4,700 hobbies.
Well, isn't it the hobby of hobbies? I'm pretty sure that's what I call it every time I look at all of my stuff.
Hey, I sometimes describe it as 47 like different hobbies, like all in a hoopaland and a false moustache. But that's just because I'm a Burgundian. So,
I love it. All right. Who or what do you, or multiple people, do you wish to do a shout out to?
I would like to shout out to all of the amazing people around the known world who are communicating and sharing what we do. I think it's a really, really exciting time to be living. I love the fact that I can do classes in Drachenwald and I can connect with people in the West, and then I can, you know, catch up with people in Edelmar or Avakal or Artemisia, you know, and all of the other fabulous kingdoms. Not dissing anybody by not mentioning you. I just hit the ones off the top of my head. There's a lot. That's, you know. I'd also like to thank all of the officers around the known world in the different roles, because this is, if you think about it, they are sort of the engine that keeps us all running, and it's a huge thing. So, and basically to everyone who takes the time to be a bit kind, to reach out and connect with someone, say hi, you know, share something that they're working on. You're what make our community great. It's absolutely amazing.
Awesome. I love that. My shout out actually had changed from what I originally was going to do, just because I got sick and couldn't go to an event, and I had a bunch of different tasks. So I want to give a shout out to every member of the Bronze Helm 12th Night event staff that stepped in and covered my role, taking care of the auction at the event, making sure that scrolls got delivered, making sure that my husband's exchequer stuff was covered, because he's way sicker than I am. And so my shout outs to you guys for picking up the slack. Like, we cared enough because we didn't want to get you sick, but you guys cared enough to make things happen even though we couldn't be there. So thank you. Well, now to plugs. Coming up here on Kal-bardr's Corner on 117 on Ask the Knights, Sir Lachlan and Count Heinrich. I always want to say the H different. I'm sorry. On 121, we have on Coffee with Cal the discussion of the Baud variants with Count Elaine and Countess Sophia. Also, if you want to see what Cal is up to lately on social media, you can check him out at TikTok at Kal-bardr, or if you want to see what I'm up to, at Gina Kitts. If you want to support this amazing channel, you can by going out to Patreon and /KK Productions, supporting us that way. There's some cool options for being a patron. But you know what? You don't even have to do that. Maybe you want to get merchandise, because who doesn't like merchandise? Now SEA's got merchandise. You can get stickers by going to, oh, there's a new sticker that just dropped. How did this happen? Creating safe space equals creating community. Just done today. That's a sticker I know I don't have, and now I have to, as a little sticker goblin, must go get. So you can buy our stickers on Redbubble by searching for KK Productions. I want to thank you, Your Excellency, for joining us, for having amazing conversations, walking down this road with me. And I look forward to conversations with you further on this and about mustard, because I love mustard.
Everyone needs more mustard. Yeah.
And I want to thank our audience for joining. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night.